Half Empty, Squeaky Clean, In Between Mysteries, Book 3.5, by Christy, Barritt. Chapter 1. I know these teacups don't look like much, but they have a lot of sentimental value to me and my family. Glenn Larson stared me dead in the eye. They may not be important to anyone else, but they're important to me. That's why I hired you to transport these instead of shipping them. The man sat in a wheelchair, and my impression was that he didn't drive, nor did he have family in the area he could ask to run this errand. For that reason, Riley Thomas, my fiancé, and I had driven down from Norfolk, Virginia to Hatteras, North Carolina. Ever since I'd lost my job with the medical examiner's office, not for anything I'd done, but because of budget cuts, I was trying to make money wherever and however I could. Unfortunately, I hadn't been able to bring myself to tell Riley that I was now unemployed. It was a weird hang-up, I know, but he'd been so proud of me. And now I felt like I was right back where I started. It wasn't that I thought he'd love me less. I supposed I just feared it might somehow change his perception of me. It was one thing if a lawyer was engaged to a medical legal death investigator. It was another thing if he was engaged to a crime scene cleaner. I was going to tell him. Really, I was. I just needed to find the right moment. In the meantime, my brother's friend Jeremy had asked me to do a run for him. He worked for an app called Errand Peeps, a service that hired people to do miscellaneous courier jobs. The pay had been decent, and Jeremy said he was making an extra $500 a month on the side gig. I'd told him yes, I'd take the job for him. Plus, it was good to have an excuse to come to the Outer Banks, especially on such a pretty July day. I will be very careful with these dishes. I raised the box in my hands and tried to smile reassuringly. He scowled before snapping, "Good. If anything happens to them, I'll sue." I flinched at his words. He was taking this delivery very, very seriously. Exactly what were his expectations after hiring a stranger to do this job and paying such a paltry amount? The man wasn't the most pleasant. He had pale skin dotted with uncountable age spots and a fringe of white hair that was a little too long around the crown of his head. A couple of his teeth were purple, and a couple were missing. Plus, there was an unsettling intensity in his gaze. "Don't break them," he said. "I mean it. I need to know these will be taken care of." I was surprised, considering how sentimental he was, that he'd hired a stranger to transport these old dishes. But maybe he truly didn't have anyone else. I gave a slight bow and decided to humor him by going along with his overreaction to this assignment. "I will treat your dishes as if they're both valuable and fragile. I promise to take most excellent care of them." Glenn stared at me another moment, and I halfway expected him to spit out more words of caution. Instead, he nodded. "You do that. Let me know when you get to Aunt Lynn's house. As soon as I know these teacups have arrived, I'll send payment, including money for gas." The proposition was risky. I probably should have asked for at least half down. If for some reason Glenn decided not to pay me, then I'd be out at least $30 in gas, plus a lot of time. The payment for this transport was $100. Riley didn't think the pay was worth the assignment. He was more analytical than I, and he figured we'd be gone at least 6 hours. After all, Hatteras was 2.5 hours each way, plus the time for stopping. So, according to Riley, if we spent 6 hours on this trip only to make $100, then we were being paid around $16 an hour for our time. Since we were both college-educated, Riley a lawyer, so him more than I, this felt like a waste of time to him. However, I didn't mind the trip. It was a good opportunity for the two of us to spend time together, and I'd never turn that down. I'd gone back to doing some crime scene cleaning after being let go from the ME's office. But no jobs had popped up today, so at least I was making some money. I did have bills to pay, after all. Glenn watched as I carefully carried the box from his porch. Riley waited in the car. He'd gotten a phone call about a case he was working, so he'd ended up staying in his sedan to talk. I paused near the Camry's trunk and balanced the box on the bumper while tapping on the window to get Riley to pop it open. Glenn grunted, making it clear he already didn't approve of my transportation methods. "Have a safe trip back," he called, "and don't mess up." With the July sun pressing on me and humidity causing my already frizzy hair to grow larger by the second, I put the box in Riley's trunk, closed it, and then hurried to get inside his Camry. Riley ended his call just then and turned toward me. "Everything good?" "Just peachy." Before we pulled away, I glanced at the house again and saw Glenn still in his doorway watching us. Man, was I happy to get away from him. His creepy vibes had me second-guessing this whole trip. As we took off down the road, I glanced at Riley. Riley's thick, dark hair was tousled today. His striking blue eyes were both intelligent and compassionate. He was tall and lean with the build of a runner, and he was mine. I glanced at the ring on my finger. My fiancé. I still couldn't get used to those words. I wanted to pinch myself. In all my wildest dreams, I never saw myself ending up with someone like Riley. He was basically the man of my dreams. "So, how did it go?" he asked, casually stretching his arm across the back of my seat. Glenn was a little intense. Intense? Riley raised his eyebrows curiously. Apparently, these teacups are very important to his family, specifically his Aunt Lynn. This whole situation seems weird to me. Riley shook his head before shrugging, but to each his own. Now, we've got to get this box to Aunt Lynn before Glenn has an aneurysm. And I don't say that lightly. I really do think he could have an aneurysm over this. To my surprise, Riley veered off Highway 12 and into the parking lot of a local gift shop. "What are you doing?" I stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. He wasn't one to spontaneously go shopping, especially in a store that specialized in mermaids. "I need to know one thing before we go any farther." As he climbed out of the car, I scrambled after him, wondering what I was missing. He popped the trunk and opened the box. Maybe he was going to perform some kind of teacup exorcism to banish Glenn's creepy vibes from the car. "What are you doing?" I asked again. "I need to make sure I'm not transporting drugs." "Oh," I said with an airy breath. I totally should have thought of that. Smart thinking. You'd think that I, out of all people, would have had that thought go through my mind. After all, I was a crime scene cleaner who regularly stuck my nose into other people's business. I had encountered some pretty shady people in my time working as an unofficial private investigator. The last thing Riley and I needed was to be caught transporting drugs over state lines. I was so glad he'd come with me. He was definitely the yin to my yang. I held my breath as he opened the box top. What would we find inside? Wadded-up newspapers greeted us. Carefully, Riley pulled the top layer of stuffing away. Wrapped teacups and saucers rested beneath it. Empty teacups. Teacups that were not filled with any type of drug. Antique cups that really weren't even all that remarkable, if you asked me. Hand-painted roses in faded pink danced along the rim, while gilt edging, slightly worn from decades of cherished use, caught the sunlight. The handles curved gracefully, thin enough to suggest fragility, yet sturdy enough to have survived generations of afternoon teas. I glanced at Riley to get his thoughts. "What do you think?" He frowned, which was weird because I really thought he'd be happy there weren't any drugs. "It really is just teacups." Of course that's all it is. I sounded entirely more confident than I'd felt only 20 seconds ago. You really need to stop being a teacup half-empty type of guy. He threw me a look. "So you're telling me you're a teacup half-full type of girl?" As a matter of fact, I think I am. Before I start any investigation, I believe I'm going to solve the crime and find the bad guy. I shrugged before pushing back a red curl as the wind caught it and blew it in my face. He let out a laugh. "Yes, you do. But for the record, I don't honestly think you're a pessimist." "That's good because I don't think I am either, so we're going to have to mark this half-empty, half-full case closed." "But first," I pulled out my phone and snapped a quick picture of one of the teacups, just for insurance purposes. Smart thinking. With that, Riley repacked the papers around the cups, put the top back on the box, and slammed the trunk shut again. Then we were on the road. This was going to be the easiest money I'd ever made. Chapter 2. Riley and I drove up Hatteras Island until we reached Nag's Head. That was when we decided to take a bathroom break and get some gas. After Riley filled the tank, he headed inside for a moment. As he did, I stood outside beside his Camry, getting some fresh air, and glanced around. Suddenly, the hair on my neck rose. I knew that feeling. The feeling of being watched. I slowly swiveled my head to observe everything around me. Several other cars were at the station, but I didn't see anyone's eyes on me. A mother and daughter walked down the sidewalk toward the beach. Vehicles drove past, laden with beach chairs and surfboards. A biker zoomed by singing a Jason Aldean song at the top of his lungs. Dunes stood across the street, thick with shrubs. Beach houses rose on the other side of the road, most full of tourists enjoying their summer vacation. But, again, I didn't see anyone watching me. So where was this feeling coming from? Was I imagining things? I nibbled on my bottom lip. I wasn't sure. I'd learned to trust my gut instincts. But as Riley stepped back outside, I flashed him a smile and decided not to mention the strange feeling I'd experienced. I was probably being paranoid. Besides, we needed to get down the road. Glenn was counting on us, and I'd hate to let Glenn down. I took one more glance around before climbing back in the car. But as hard as I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. An hour and a half later, Riley and I pulled up to Aunt Lynn's house in Norfolk, Virginia. I'd kept my eye on the road for the entire drive, but I hadn't seen anyone following us. It appeared I was just being paranoid back at the gas station, which was a relief. I tended to run into trouble entirely too often, and I'd gotten myself into some real pickles in the past. Aunt Lynn lived in a not-so-great part of town, one I might not want to go to alone at night. It was the kind of neighborhood that real estate agents probably described as up and coming, while secretly wondering what exactly it was up and coming from. Several houses looked like they were one strong wind away from giving up entirely. However, I had Riley with me, so I should be okay. It wasn't that Riley was a big, tough guy, but he was smart, and intelligence could go a long way. "I'm ready to get these cups off my hands," I said before climbing out. Note to self, next time someone offers me money to transport sentimental items, maybe consider a less stressful career, say in, I don't know, alligator wrestling maybe. "I hope this is worth it," Riley muttered as he climbed out with me. I hope so also. As soon as I delivered this box, I was sending Glenn the invoice. Then I'd pay Riley for his gas, and the rest of the money would be profit. Groceries could be bought for another week. Living paycheck to paycheck could be a real drag, but it was my reality now. With Riley beside me on the crumbling concrete porch littered with cigarette butts, I rang the doorbell and waited. Across the street, some teens riding bikes had paused to stare at me, an obvious outsider in their neighborhood, and they began calling out inappropriate remarks. I tried to ignore them. This neighborhood definitely wasn't safe. I rang the bell again, anxious for Aunt Lynn to answer. Maybe when she did, I'd figure out a way to gently tell her she should look for somewhere else to live. Heavy footsteps lumbered toward the door. Good. She was home. I glanced at Riley as he held the box, his muscles tight and defined as he stood there. Finally, the door opened. But it wasn't Aunt Lynn standing there. No, it was a large, burly man with a scraggly brown and gray beard and a robust belly. I'm sorry. I think we're at the wrong place." I took a step back. "Who you looking for?" The man's voice sounded low and rumbling as he glowered at us. "Aunt Lynn," I told him. "You heard of her?" "Heard of her? I am Aunt Lynn." He snarled as he stared at me. I blinked as I tried to figure out how to correct my snafu before this man smashed me like a bug. Chapter 3. I blinked again at the mountain of a man standing before us. Aunt Lynn. Words failed me. I had not been expecting him. "It's Aunt Lynn," he grumbled, still scowling. Antlin. It's an old family name. Well, that was unexpected. I started eloquently, because apparently my brain had decided to take a little vacation. "We have a delivery for you, from Glenn Larson." Riley stepped forward with the box, his lawyer instincts probably kicking in. Always best to get straight to business when dealing with potentially dangerous strangers. That sounded like his logic. About time. Antlin took the box from Riley's hands like it weighed nothing, which, considering the guy's biceps, it probably did seem like it weighed nothing to him. He set it down on a table just inside the doorway and immediately started tearing into the newspaper padding. I held my breath, suddenly nervous. What if we'd somehow damaged the precious family heirlooms in the 3 hours since they'd been in my possession? I mean, I didn't see how that was possible, but maybe it was. I had a feeling Antlin wouldn't take that news well. He might even try to break us in return. I swallowed hard. Antlin's hands moved methodically through the packing material, pulling out teacup after teacup. 1, 2, 3. Then he stopped. His face, which had been merely unfriendly before, now looked like a thundercloud ready to unleash the apocalypse. "Where are the rest of them?" His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow seemed louder than shouting. "What do you mean?" I asked, though a sick feeling was already settling in my stomach like a bad gas station burrito. "There should be 12 teacups. I only count 6. Riley stepped closer to peer into the box. "That's not possible. You lost half my uncle's teacups?" Antlin's voice climbed back toward normal volume in a way that suggested he was building up to something much worse. My mind raced. We'd only made 2 stops. First, Riley pulled into a parking lot to check what was inside the box, and the second stop was at the gas station in Nag's Head. Riley and I had both been away from the car at the same time for only a couple of minutes at the gas station. Could someone have stolen the teacups in that short amount of time? It didn't seem likely. "Are you sure there were 12? Riley's professional mediator voice kicked in. "Yes." Antlin's voice left no room for argument, but that had never stopped me before. "Are you positive?" I asked. "Maybe you could call Glenn and—" "There were 12, the man seethed, his accusing gaze on us. "What did you do with the rest of them?" What did we do with the rest of them? I wanted to laugh, but couldn't. Antlin would not approve of the reaction. "I'm telling you, these are the dishes we picked up. We didn't count them. I didn't think it was my business to go through the box. However, I totally wasn't above doing that. Again, something I decided not to mention. Antlin puffed and stepped closer. I could practically see the steam coming from his ears. "I need those other teacups." "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but if these teacups are so important, why didn't you pick them up yourself?" Riley asked. "Why hire strangers to transport them?" That was when I noticed it. The black electronic bracelet on Antlin's leg, barely visible beneath his jeans. An ankle monitor. Well, that explained a few things. Like why Glenn had been so paranoid and why Antlin looked like he could star in a reality show called America's Scariest Nephews. "You need to find them." Antlin's eyes narrowed to slits. "They're heirlooms, in case you didn't know. My uncle will be very upset if they don't all arrive safely." The way he said, "very upset," made me think Glenn's potential aneurysm would be the least of our problems. I channeled my inner Hamilton because I was not throwing away my shot at getting out of this alive. "Look, I think there's a misunderstanding here." "You have until midnight to find them," Antlin interrupted, checking his watch. "Midnight, or else." Riley stepped forward. "Or else what?" Antlin's response was wordless, but crystal clear. He drew one thick finger slowly across his throat. Great, just great. Somewhere between Hatteras and here, I'd apparently signed up for a real-life episode of The Sopranos Teacup Edition. I was definitely updating my profile on that job app after this, assuming I lived long enough to do so. Well, that went better than expected, I said sarcastically as Riley and I practically sprinted back to his car. Better than expected? Riley shot me a look that suggested my definition of better might need some work. We just got threatened by a guy who looks like he moonlights as a bouncer for the WWE. At least he gave us until midnight. I checked my watch. That's 7 hours. He could have given us 7 minutes, I offered weakly as I buckled my seatbelt. Always see the glass as half full, right? Besides, how is he supposed to track us down? He has an ankle monitor. I'm sure he has friends who might help him. Riley started the engine with more force than necessary. Okay, let's think about this logically. This guy is convinced Glenn gave us 12 teacups. I guess I should have counted. I shrugged, wishing I could go back and have a do-over. Don't beat yourself up. He paused. What about the picture? Can you tell anything from it? No, I unfortunately only took a photo of one teacup. I can't see the rest. Riley released another breath. Who would have imagined something like this might happen? Not me. I shook my head. I mean, worst case scenario I imagined was that I'd accidentally break one and have to replace it with something from Walmart, or that I'd get a bad review on the app. You know, driver was late, teacups arrived dusty, 2 stars. So let's go with this guy's assumption that we somehow lost 6 teacups, which still doesn't sound plausible to me. The only time we could have lost them, if that's what happened, would be at the gas station. Your car was only unmonitored for a couple of minutes. But I suppose that could be long enough for someone skilled to jimmy the trunk. It still just seemed so unlikely to me, but it was really the only option. Riley blew out a breath. Let's say that happened. If it did, why would someone only steal 6 teacups? I raised my hands, palms up, in genuine confusion. Why would someone steal any of these teacups? Riley ran a hand through his hair. Excellent question. My impression was that these were only valuable to the family. But if this family is involved in some type of crime syndicate... My stomach churned as the words left my lips. Then it doesn't matter if the teacups are valuable or not. These people want them back, and they think we either stole them or lost them. Silence stretched between us a moment, and I pressed my eyes closed. This isn't good, Riley. How are we going to find them? His jaw twitched as he shook his head. Good question, and unfortunately, I don't have any answers. Chapter 4. Just then, a memory hit me like a lightning strike. I sat up straighter. This might be nothing, but... When you were inside the gas station using the restroom, I came back out and stood by the car. I thought I felt someone watching me, but I dismissed it as paranoia. Riley rubbed his jaw. So, are you thinking someone saw Glenn give you a box, assumed these teacups were inside, and then followed us, waiting for just the right opportunity to steal them? I don't know what else to think. It's the only thing that makes sense, even though I was watching and didn't see anyone following us. Were you watching the whole time, or after you got the feeling someone was watching you at the gas station? After, I admitted. But still, it's not like somebody's going to randomly open your trunk and swipe 6 ugly teacups. Riley sighed. None of this is logical. I remembered Antlin running his finger across his throat, and I shivered. I needed to make this make sense, but the task felt impossible. It doesn't matter if it makes sense, I finally admitted. The only thing that matters is that we find the teacups. Riley shifted toward me, his gaze briefly scanning the sidewalk for any trouble. The group of teens had moved on, thankfully. Do you remember any details from the cars around us at the station? He asked. I closed my eyes and tried to replay the moment. The mother and daughter walking, the cars with surfboards on top, the biker singing, and then there was this guy at the pump next to us. I tried to picture his face, but he'd been pretty ordinary looking. He hadn't even made eye contact with me, so I dismissed him as the source of my unease. His car was from this area. How'd you know that? It had Virginia plates, and there was a sticker on the back windshield for a local restaurant. I saw some boxes in the back with the name of the restaurant on them, so that also made me think maybe this guy worked there. His car was close enough to ours that maybe, just maybe, he could have grabbed some of the teacups. Maybe we came back out before he could grab the rest. Wrinkles formed at Riley's eyes, and he frowned. Why didn't he just grab the whole box? Wouldn't that have been more logical than just grabbing half? It would have been faster also. I have no idea. I paused. Should we call the police? I can't believe I'm saying this, but not yet. Riley's words shocked me just as much as they probably shocked him. He was a by-the-book kind of guy. Riley was already reaching for his phone, which he'd left in his cup holder. What restaurant? He wanted to investigate himself? Okay, I could handle that. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to remember that bumper sticker. Something with, Mama's? Mama's Seafood Shack, I think. It had a cartoon crab on it. I'm looking it up. Riley's fingers flew over his phone screen. Got it. Mama's Seafood Shack. It's about 15 minutes from here. You think this guy might be there? That he might have something to do with this? We don't have any other leads, and there's only one way to find out. And Gabby, next time you get a feeling you're being watched, maybe mention it. Noted, I said, though part of me was already thinking about what we'd do if we found this guy. Confronting potential teacup thieves wasn't exactly covered in my crime scene cleaning training. But apparently, life was just one big on-the-job training program, and today's lesson was how to interrogate strangers without getting murdered. A few minutes later, Riley and I pulled to a stop in front of Mama's Seafood. The restaurant was a weathered building at the back of an old neighborhood and beside a muddy creek surrounded by marsh grass and crab traps. It looked like the kind of place that probably served amazing food, but might collapse if someone sneezed beside it. The smell of fried seafood and Old Bay seasoning drifted from the kitchen, and seagulls circled overhead like they knew something good was being cooked inside. And there, in the parking lot, was a beat-up sedan with Virginia plates and that familiar, faded bumper sticker. That's it, I whispered, as if the car could hear me. We parked a few spaces away and walked toward the car. I peered in the back. All the boxes I'd seen there earlier were gone. Out of curiosity, I tried the trunk. It was locked. Go figure. Instead, Riley and I headed toward the entrance of the restaurant. Through the window, I spotted the guy from the gas station. He sat alone at a corner booth, his hands moving as if he were sorting something. Riley slowed his steps. What's the plan here? We go in and casually ask him about our missing teacups. Casually ask a potential thief about stolen goods. Right. What could go wrong? I could hear the eye roll in his voice. I pushed open the door, the little bell above it announcing our arrival with way too much enthusiasm. The inside of Mama's looked like someone had decided to decorate with every fishing cliché ever. Nets on the walls, a mounted marlin that had seen better decades, and enough nautical rope to rig a small sailboat. It was that dead zone between lunch and dinner, so only a few die-hard seafood enthusiasts were scattered around the dining room, probably contemplating whether it was too early for the dinner special. The guy looked up from his table. He wore a t-shirt with Mama's written on the front, and it appeared he'd been rolling plasticware into napkins. He worked here, didn't he? Just for a second, his eyes widened in what looked like recognition before he quickly looked back down at the task before him. He definitely remembered us. It was time to channel my inner detective. Or at least my inner person, who really didn't want to end up on the wrong side of Antlin's throat-slashing gesture. Chapter 5. Riley and I approached the booth as if we were two normal people looking for a place to sit. You know, the kind of normal people who definitely weren't about to interrogate a stranger about stolen antique teacups. "Excuse me." I slid into the booth and sat across from gas station man before he could object. Riley followed suit, only he slid in next to the man, effectively trapping the guy unless he wanted to make a scene. The man looked up, and I got a better look at him. Mid-50s, maybe, with thinning brown hair and the kind of mustache that suggested he'd peaked in 1987. His eyes darted between Riley and me like a cornered animal. "Do I know you folks?" His voice had that forced casual tone that screamed guilty as charged. "We saw you at the gas station earlier," I said with the kind of sweet smile I usually reserved for people I was about to disappoint. "In Nag's Head. You were at the pump right next to us. I did go down there earlier to pick up some seafood from a supplier." He blinked rapidly, and his left eyelid started doing this little twitchy dance. "I stopped to get gas. Can't say I remember you specifically." Oh, he was lying, and not even doing a good job of it. I'd seen better acting in elementary school Christmas pageants. "Really?" Riley leaned forward slightly. "Because we had some antique teacups in our car, and now half of them are missing. Funny coincidence, don't you think?" The man's eyelid now twitched so hard I thought it might achieve flight. "Teacups? I don't know anything about any teacups. Why would I want teacups? As you can see, I'm a restaurateur." "Your mama?" The question came out before I could stop it. He didn't respond, only stared at me. "Anyway, that's a very good question." I crossed my arms. "Why would you want a bunch of old teacups badly enough to steal them? And why only half of them?" I was struggling to see the logic of this whole situation. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about." The man started to slide toward the edge of the booth. "I need to get going." Riley didn't move to let him out. "Actually, we'd really appreciate it if you could help us figure this out. See, we're in a bit of a time crunch." The man's eyes darted toward the back of the restaurant, then back to us. Now that was interesting. What was back there that had him so worried? "I told you, I don't know anything about your teacups." His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. I tried to read his text message, but he snatched his phone before I could. When he looked back at us, his voice turned harder. "Now, if you'll excuse me." The next thing I knew, the man practically vaulted over Riley. He was making a run for it, I realized, and we needed to stop him. The man's speed was actually kind of impressive. He sprinted toward the back of the restaurant like his pants were on fire. Liar, liar. "Should we follow him?" Riley asked. "Do you even have to ask?" We sprang to our feet and headed toward the back of the restaurant, past the restrooms, and through a door marked "Employees Only." Sometimes you had to bend a few rules in the name of justice, or at least in the name of not getting throat-slashed by Antlin. I scanned the back. The area contained typical restaurant stuff, boxes of supplies, industrial freezers, and a lingering smell that suggested someone had been frying fish since the Clinton administration. Two cooks stood in the corner, laughing at a video on one of their phones instead of paying attention. Perfect. I stepped farther inside. Our twitchy friend was nowhere to be seen. "Where did he go?" I whispered. Riley pointed toward a back door that was slightly ajar. We crept over and peered into the parking lot just in time to see a black Mercedes pulling away. But the guy we'd just been talking to wasn't driving. Someone else was behind the wheel. Someone with dark hair slicked back and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved out of granite by someone who was really, really angry. The driver glanced at the restaurant as he drove away, and when his eyes met mine through the window, a chill ran down my spine. Had that guy just been waiting outside in case his friend ran into trouble? Was he a getaway driver? That didn't make any sense. Maybe this driver guy had texted him, instructing him to leave. That driver who'd picked him up didn't just look shady. He looked like he could teach a masterclass on being shifty. "Did you see that?" I hissed to Riley. The fact that our lying friend just got into a car with what appears to be a member of the local mob? Yeah, I caught that. So, what does this mean? Does Twitchy Guy have the teacups? Did he just hand them over to Granite Face? Riley was quiet a moment, most likely running through all the possibilities. It means we're dealing with something a lot bigger than a simple theft. Great. Just great. I'd gone from a forensic tech to an unemployed crime scene cleaner to inadvertent participant in what was starting to look like some kind of criminal conspiracy. And all over a bunch of old teacups. I was definitely putting "no criminal enterprises" in my job app profile after this. Right after "must survive current job." Chapter 6. "We have to follow them!" I practically shouted, already running toward Riley's car. We'd already spent too much time talking. Riley was right behind me, his keys already in his hand. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but you're right. We jumped into his car, and Riley peeled out of the parking lot with more enthusiasm than his sensible sedan was probably designed for. The Mercedes was already a few blocks ahead, but I could still see it. "There," I pointed. "He's turning left at the intersection." Riley gunned it through a yellow light that was definitely more red than yellow, earning us an angry honk from a pickup truck. I'm adding reckless driving to the list of things I never thought I'd do for teacups, Riley muttered. Riley was a stickler for following the law, so this was definitely out of his comfort zone. We followed the Mercedes through downtown, staying back far enough to avoid suspicion, but close enough to keep them in sight. For a few minutes, I actually thought we might pull this off. Then we hit the bridge construction that had been plaguing downtown Norfolk for months. The sedan ahead of us somehow managed to squeeze through just as the flagman switched the sign from slow to stop. Riley pulled to a stop in front of the flagman. I clenched my teeth as frustration rose in me. "Can you get the license plate?" Riley squinted through the distance. I pulled out my phone and tried to take a picture, but it was useless. The vehicle was too far away. I watched the Mercedes disappear around a bend on the other side of the bridge. "We need to pivot," Riley said, as we settled back in our seats for what looked like a very long wait. Riley managed to do a U-turn and get out of the construction line. There was no way we'd catch this guy now, and we both knew it. We headed back toward Norfolk. Well, that was disappointing. I sighed, trying not to let this setback derail me. What's our next move, Ned? Ned? You know, Nancy Drew's longtime boyfriend. Nancy Drew had a boyfriend? Riley still looked confused. So much for my cute quip. It wasn't nearly as cute if you had to explain. Never mind. What's our next move? Riley pulled into the closest fast food parking lot, a McDonald's that had seen better decades, and put the Camry in park. We sat there a moment processing what had just happened. But there were so many unanswered questions, it was hard to make sense of anything. Processing things and understanding them were two entirely different things. "Okay, let's think about this logically," I finally said. "What if those teacups really were somehow hiding drugs? Why else would they be such a big deal? No one who's sentimental about teacups would go to these lengths." His expression grew pinched. "But I checked for drugs. The cups were empty." "Maybe they were hidden somewhere else. In the hollow parts like the handles? I don't know. I'm not exactly an expert in drug smuggling methods." "I don't think the teacups were big enough for that." Good point. I kept thinking. What if the drugs weren't in the teacups? What if the teacups themselves are the drugs? What? I mean, drugs are the only reason I can think of that someone would want these teacups so badly. There's definitely more to this story. Riley drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. Or maybe this really is about the missing cups themselves. What if this isn't about drugs, but what if the teacups are actually valuable? More valuable than Glenn let on. I perked up. Now that was an interesting thought. You know what? There's one way to find out. What do you have in mind? There's that antique shop in downtown Norfolk. Remember it? The one with the snooty owner who acts like she's running the Smithsonian instead of selling old junk. She used to be my neighbor in high school, and we ran into her at that Mediterranean restaurant once. I remember, Eleanor's Antiques, Riley nodded. That woman is a hoot and very memorable. You think she might know something about the teacups? If these things are actually valuable, she'd know. She's like a walking encyclopedia of old stuff. Riley put his car back into drive. It's worth a shot, and it's better than sitting here trying to figure out our next move while eating soft serve. Don't worry, the machines are probably broken anyway. He chuckled. True that. As we pulled back onto the road, that feeling of being watched came over me again. I couldn't shake it. I kept checking the side mirrors, looking for that dark sedan or anything else that seemed out of place. I saw nothing, but the feeling remained. Riley, I said quietly, do you think we're in over our heads here? Probably. But we're kind of committed now, aren't we? It's not like we can call Antlin and say, sorry, we gave up looking for your uncle's teacups because things got a little scary. He had a point. We were definitely past the point of no return. The question was, exactly what had we gotten ourselves into? And more importantly, would we be able to get ourselves out of it? I kept watching the mirrors as we drove, wondering if we were about to get some answers or just dig ourselves in even deeper. Chapter 7. Eleanor's Antiques sat on a less-than-charming street in downtown Norfolk, sandwiched between a bail bondsman and a place that advertised "We Buy Gold" in neon letters that flickered ominously. Not exactly the kind of neighborhood where you'd expect to find priceless antiques. But then again, this whole day had been full of surprises. The shop itself looked like it had been transported directly from Victorian England, complete with dusty windows and the kind of ornate lettering that suggested the owner took herself very, very seriously. And she did. Eleanor once knocked on our door to complain that our Christmas lights were pedestrian. I should have known she'd end up in the antiques business. She'd always acted like everything she owned was a priceless heirloom. A bell chimed dramatically as we pushed through the door, and I was immediately hit by the smell of old wood, lavender, and what I suspected might be mothballs. "Welcome, welcome," a voice came from somewhere deep in the shop's cluttered interior. "Come in, darlings. Don't be shy." Eleanor herself emerged from behind a towering display of china, and she was exactly as I remembered, tall with silver hair piled high and wearing enough jewelry to stock a small boutique. But what really made Eleanor memorable was her accent, which seemed to be part Southern belle, part British aristocrat, and part community theater performer. "Well, if it isn't little Gabby," she pressed a jeweled hand to her chest. "And you've brought your handsome lawyer friend. What brings you to my humble establishment, sugar?" "Hi, Eleanor." I pulled out my phone. "We were hoping you could help us identify something." I showed her the picture I'd snapped of the teacup earlier, and Eleanor's entire demeanor changed in an instant. Her eyes went wide, and she actually gasped, like a full-on, hand-over-the-mouth soap opera gasp. She knew something, didn't she? I held my breath as I waited to find out what. "Oh, my stars." Each of Eleanor's words were delivered with the kind of dramatic pause that would make Shakespeare weep. "Where did you get this photograph, child?" "We were transporting some dishes for someone," Riley said carefully. "Why? Do you recognize them?" Eleanor snatched the phone from my hands and held it closer to her face, then farther away, then closer again. "Recognize them? Sugar. These aren't just dishes. Do you have any idea what you're looking at? These are Meissen porcelain teacups from the 1740s. Riley and I exchanged glances. "I take it they're valuable?" My voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Valuable?" Eleanor's laugh was part delight, part hysteria. "Darling, each one of these cups is worth more than most people make in a year. The complete set, if it really is complete, would be worth." She paused for dramatic effect, fanning herself with a lace handkerchief that had apparently materialized from thin air. Well, let's just say it would be enough to buy a very nice house in a very nice neighborhood. My knees went weak. How much exactly are we talking about here? For the full set of 12? Authenticated 1740 Meissen with the original saucers? Conservative estimate would be around $300,000. If they're in perfect condition and have the right provenance, we could be looking at $500,000. Riley made a choking sound. $500,000? And someone just entrusted these to you two? Eleanor looked at us like we'd told her we were personally delivering the crown jewels. Who on earth would... The rest of her sentence was cut off by the horrifying sound of glass exploding inward. "Get down!" Riley tackled me, pushing me behind a display case. Eleanor screamed and dove behind the counter with surprising agility for someone wearing that many petticoats. More glass rained down around us as what sounded like gunshots echoed from the street. Through the chaos, I heard the roar of an engine speeding away, then quiet. "Is everyone okay?" Riley called out, his voice muffled by the antique armoire we now hid behind. "Still breathing," Eleanor shouted back. "Though I may never recover from the trauma, my beautiful windows." I peered around the edge of our hiding spot at the destruction. The front windows were completely gone, and shattered glass covered everything like the world's most dangerous confetti. Well, my voice only shook slightly. I think we can officially say we're in over our heads. Chapter 8. The police arrived faster than I expected, which was either really good luck or really bad timing, depending on how you looked at it. Apprehension rose inside me. If I wasn't vigilant, this was how Riley would find out I'd lost my job. And that would be terrible. I would need to be very, very careful right now. 2 uniformed officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else but here swept into Eleanor's shop like they owned the place. Then Detective Adams arrived. Detective Adams. I considered him a friend, though I wasn't sure he would say the same about me. He was the one who'd helped me get a job with the ME's office. The man was in his early 50s, bald and stocky. I trusted him, and I was glad he was here. Something flashed through his eyes when he saw me. Was that dread? Certainly not. He adored me, in his own way. That was what I told myself, at least. I mean, we had been colleagues for a whole month. Before I could greet him, Eleanor began gesturing wildly at the destruction, while giving what I was pretty sure was a completely embellished account of the attack. "It was like something out of a war movie," she declared, one hand pressed to her forehead. "Glass flying everywhere, the sound of gunfire echoing through the streets. I thought we were all going to perish." Perish? I caught Riley's eye, and we exchanged a look. Eleanor was many things, but subtle wasn't one of them. "Ma'am, we need you to calm down." Detective Adams had worked long enough to have probably seen every kind of drama Norfolk had to offer. "I am calm," Eleanor declared, her fisted hands going to her hips. "And you two." Adams turned to Riley and me. "Were you witnesses to this incident?" I opened my mouth to give some vague, noncommittal answer, but Eleanor beat me to it. "Oh, they weren't just witnesses, Detective. They were the targets. Someone was shooting at them because of those priceless antique teacups they showed me." I pressed my eyes closed, so much for keeping things vague. One of the uniformed officers, a younger guy with sharp eyes, turned toward me, his eyes lighting with recognition. "Wait a minute. You're Gabby St. Clair, right?" My stomach clenched. Was he about to tell Riley about my job? How was I going to explain this? Yes, I finally said. "I'm Gabby." There was no need to deny it, since everyone already knew the answer. I braced myself for what he'd say next. "I thought I recognized you." "Officer Mike Conroy." He extended his hand. "I've heard stories about you from the guys who worked with you when you were doing forensics for the department." "You mean from people who work with her in the forensics department?" Riley corrected. I let out a thin laugh, unsure where Conroy was going with this. Adams gave me a look. He'd caught on to the fact that Riley had corrected him and that I hadn't bothered to correct the correction. And what did Conroy mean by stories? That could mean anything from she was competent to she was a complete disaster. Given my track record, it was probably somewhere in between. Stories? My throat tightened as I waited for his response. Good ones, mostly. He offered a slight grin. Word is, you have a knack for getting to the truth, even when it gets you into trouble. Well, that was accurate, if not entirely reassuring. Detective Adams cleared his throat. So, what's this about antique teacups, Gabby? Riley and I exchanged another look. How much should we tell them? On one hand, we were clearly in way over our heads and could probably use police protection. On the other hand, we still had 6 hours to find those missing teacups before Antlin made good on his throat-slashing promise. We were hired to transport some antique dishes. Riley said each word carefully and with precision. Half of them apparently went missing during our trip, and we came here trying to determine their value and figure out what exactly we've gotten ourselves into. And someone decided to shoot up an antique shop because of some missing dishes? Detective Adams gave us the kind of look usually reserved for people who claimed their cats could predict the weather. These weren't just any dishes, Eleanor interjected, apparently unable to help herself. We're talking about 18th century Meissen porcelain worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Detective Adams's eyebrows shot up. Hundreds of thousands? At least. Eleanor drew out each syllable as if she were delivering the final line of a Shakespearean tragedy. Adams nodded slowly. We're going to need a full statement from each of you, and contact information for whoever hired you to transport these items. Of course, I said, though I was pretty sure giving them Glenn's information would only complicate things further. After 20 minutes of questions, statements, and Eleanor's continued commentary, the police finally seemed satisfied. At least for now. Adams pulled me aside. You got yourself in another pickle, huh? That didn't take long. I promise, I was just trying to pick up an extra job to earn some money. You've got too much talent for that. Warmth filled my chest at his compliment. I dropped my voice before saying, I appreciate that, but in case you forgot, I lost my job. He frowned. I know, I regret that. Why does it sound like your fiancé doesn't know that? He nodded toward Riley, who was still talking to Eleanor. I haven't been able to bring myself to tell him. I shrugged sheepishly. I know I have to, but I'm sure he'll understand. And I'm sure you have a bright career ahead of you in forensics. Don't give up. I'm Gabby Never Gives Up St. Clair. He smiled. That's the spirit. I'll be in touch if we have any more questions. And Gabby, be careful. If someone's willing to shoot up a public business over some teacups, they're probably not going to hesitate to escalate things further. A frown tugged at my lips. Great. That was just what I needed to hear. Chapter 9. Eleanor insisted she'd find someone else to help her clean up her shop. She wanted us and the bad vibes we'd brought with us gone. Before we left, she asked if I'd share that photo of the cups with her, however. She wanted to keep her eyes open for more information on them. I didn't see any harm in it, so I texted the photo to her number. Then Riley and I stepped outside, free to go. Bystanders were gathered on the sidewalk, trying to see what the commotion was about. Crime scene tape stretched across the store. I shook my head at the sight of it all. As I did, tiny pieces of glass tinkled onto the sidewalk around my feet. We climbed into his car and locked the doors. Well, that could have gone worse. I carefully brushed more glass off my black, "Not Today Satan" t-shirt. It seemed more appropriate now than ever. How exactly could that have gone worse? Riley asked as he started the engine. The police could have arrested us for transporting stolen goods across state lines, for starters. Fair point. He pulled out of the parking space. Although, hopefully, they'd have a little more grace for you since you're now one of them. I swallowed the lump in my throat, wondering if this was my chance to correct him. Before I could, he continued. Who were those people who shot at us? Someone who wanted to send a message. Antlin must have someone following us. Maybe he wanted to let us know he's serious and means business. Makes sense in a twisted, criminal sort of way, I suppose. He let out a breath. So what now? We've got maybe 6 hours before Antlin's deadline, and we're no closer to finding those missing teacups. I was about to answer when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something about it seemed familiar. I decided to answer. Hello? You find my uncle's cups yet? Antlin's gravelly voice came through my phone's speaker. My blood immediately went colder. How'd you get my number? From my uncle, of course. Now what about those cups? We're getting closer. I tried to sound more confident than I felt. You better be. Time's running out. Were you the one who sent people to shoot at... Click. Guess he wouldn't be answering that question. Riley and I drove in silence a moment. Okay, I said finally. We need to think outside the box. What if we talk to the person who recommended me for this job in the first place? Maybe he knows more about what we're really dealing with. You mean your brother's friend, Jeremy, right? Yes. Maybe Jeremy knows something about Glenn or the teacups that we don't. Riley nodded slowly. It's worth a shot, and it's better than driving around Norfolk hoping to spot that Mercedes again. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my job app notifications. Somewhere in here was the key to figuring out what we'd really gotten ourselves into. Hopefully, we'd find it before our time ran out. Finding Jeremy Kowalski wasn't hard. His address had been listed online. I didn't know much about him, only that he'd dropped out of college to pursue what he called a gaming career. Getting him to answer the door to his apartment was our first challenge. Jeremy! I pounded on the door again. I know you're in there. I see your car. His modified purple Honda Civic had been hard to miss. He'd driven it when I met him the first time. Riley stood behind me, looking like he was questioning all his life choices that had led to this moment. Are you sure this is the guy? Trust me, this is him. He's my brother's friend. Apparently, he used to be normal until he discovered he could make money playing video games online. That says a lot coming from your brother. I couldn't argue with that. Tim and I... Well, there was a lot of history between us, and lost time. He'd been kidnapped as a child and had only recently come back into my life. Things were complicated, to say the least. Finally, the door cracked open, revealing Jeremy in all his glory, unwashed hair sticking up in about 12 different directions, a stained t-shirt that proclaimed, Respawn Point Champion 2023, and a pale complexion that made him appear he hadn't seen actual sunlight since the Obama administration. Gabby? He blinked at me like I was some kind of mythical creature. What are you doing here? We need to talk about the job you recommended me for. I pushed past him into the apartment. The smell hit me immediately, a unique combination of BO, pizza boxes, and despair. The living room was dominated by a massive gaming setup that probably cost more than my monthly rent. It was surrounded by towers of empty takeout containers and enough energy drink cans to power a small country. Job? Jeremy's eyes went unfocused, as if he were scrolling through his mental browser history and coming up empty, which was concerning since this conversation was literally about something that had happened less than 24 hours ago. The courier job, Jeremy. The one where I transport antique dishes for some guy named Glenn Larson. Oh, that. He shrugged and flopped back into his gaming chair, which looked like it had been specifically designed for people who never planned to leave it. The throne-like contraption probably came with its own waste disposal system and IV drip for energy drinks. Yeah, that was no big deal. Just a simple delivery, right? Riley stepped forward, and I knew his patience was wearing thin. Someone shot at us today because of those dishes we picked up. Shot at you? Jeremy's eyes widened, and for the first time since we'd arrived, he actually looked like he was paying attention. That's not good. No kidding, I muttered. So tell us how you know these people. How did you even get connected with this job? Jeremy picked up his controller and started fidgeting with it, not meeting our eyes. They found me online, through one of the gaming forums. Said they needed someone reliable to handle a simple transport job. This wasn't through errand peeps? He shook his head. I tried to burn holes into him with my eyes. So instead of doing the job yourself, you thought of me because Tim says you're good at this kind of stuff. You know, getting things done, solving problems, and being weirdly comfortable around sketchy situations. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult. Jeremy, I used the same tone I'd perfected for dealing with difficult crime scene suspects. There's more to this story. I can tell when people are lying to me. I have a PhD in Something's Not Right Here from the University of Bad Life Choices. He continued staring at his controller, pressing buttons even though his console wasn't on. Riley crossed his arms. Look, we don't have time for games. People are threatening us, shooting at us, and we need to know what we're really dealing with. Jeremy was quiet for a long moment. Then he finally set down the controller and looked up at us. Gone was the laid-back gamer who acted like nothing in the real world could touch him. Instead, he looked like a kid who just realized the monster under his bed was real. They threatened me, okay? He said. These people, they loaned me some money for a bad online gambling habit. Turns out I owe them a lot of cash now, a lot more than I can pay. How much? Riley's hands went to his hips. 15 grand. Jeremy's voice was barely above a whisper. They said if I didn't find someone to do this delivery job for them, well, let's just say they made it clear that my gaming career would be permanently over. My stomach dropped. So you mentioned me? What had I ever done to him to deserve this? Chapter 10. I thought it was just a simple delivery, Jeremy protested. I swear, Gabby, I had no idea it would turn into whatever this is. These people you owe money to. Riley paused and rubbed his jaw. What do you know about them? I never met them in person, but the voices on the phone. Jeremy shuddered. Let's just say they didn't sound like the kind of people you want to disappoint. I stared at my brother's friend, trying to process what he'd just told us. Jeremy, do you have any idea what you've gotten me into? I'm sorry, Gabby. I really am. But I'd suggest you find those teacups. These people aren't to be messed with. No joke. This was never about transporting family heirlooms. This was about Jeremy's gambling debts. $500,000 worth of antique porcelain, and some very dangerous people who appeared willing to kill to get what they wanted. And Riley and I were caught right in the middle of it. Why did these things always happen to me? My phone buzzed just as we left Jeremy's house. My best friend Sierra Nakamura's name flashed on the screen, and I answered immediately. Hey, what's up? Gabby, you need to get back to the apartment. Now. Sierra's voice sounded tight and urgent. What's wrong? Just get here, fast. But the line went dead. Why did people keep doing that? I stared at my phone, cold dread settling in my stomach. Sierra was an animal rights activist who spent most of her time protesting outside fur stores and organizing vegan potluck dinners. She didn't do dramatic phone calls, not unless she had good reason. Riley squinted as he seemed to notice my expression. What is it? Sierra wants us back at the apartment immediately. She wouldn't tell me why, but she sounded scared? I supposed that was the right word to describe it. Yeah, she sounded unnerved. Riley was already starting the car. Then we'd better go. The drive back to my apartment felt like it took forever, even though Riley was pushing every speed limit. My mind kept racing through possibilities of why Sierra had called, and none of the options I came up with were good. Had the building sprung a pipe leak that flooded the place? Had the owner put up a "for sale" sign without any prior notice? Had her cats gone wild and had a rave in the entire building? Finally, we pulled up to the apartment building Riley, Sierra, and I all called home. It was an old Victorian house located in the Ghent area. The neighborhood was artistic and eccentric, popular with students and creative bohemians. We found Sierra pacing in the parking lot, her usually pristine black hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her "Save the Whales" t-shirt wrinkled like she'd been wringing her hands. We climbed out of Riley's car, and before we'd even taken 2 steps, Sierra rushed toward us. "Thank goodness you're here. Gabby, I'm so sorry. I got home just as they were leaving. There were 3 of them, and—" "3 of who?" I interrupted, my forehead wrinkling in confusion. "Sierra, what happened?" "Your apartment? They trashed it." Chapter 11. The blood drained from my face. Had I heard Sierra correctly? They what? I was coming back from the grocery store when I saw them leaving. Big guys. They looked like trouble. I went upstairs to check on things and... She shook her head. "I'm so sorry, Gabby." I took the stairs 2 at a time, Riley and Sierra close behind me. My apartment door was standing open, and my knees went weak at the sight that greeted me. Everything inside was destroyed. My couch was overturned, cushions slashed open with stuffing everywhere. Books were scattered across the floor, their pages torn. My kitchen cabinets hung open, contents spilled across the counters and floor. But it was the note taped to my bathroom mirror that really got my attention. "You're running out of time." I stared at the message, written in block letters that somehow managed to look threatening even in what appeared to be red crayon. Wait, that wasn't crayon. These guys had used my lipstick. Jerks. I'd actually splurged on that designer tube instead of buying one for $5 at the corner drugstore. "Gabby?" Riley's voice seemed to come from very far away. I was going to kill my brother. Not Jeremy, but my actual brother, who had introduced me to Jeremy in the first place. This was all his fault for having friends who turned out to be degenerate gamblers with connections to dangerous people. Actually, no. First, I was going to kill Jeremy. Then, I was going to kill my brother. Then, I was going to figure out how to get out of this mess. "Gabby?" Sierra touched my arm gently. "Are you okay?" Define okay. My voice sounded surprisingly steady, considering I felt like I was about to have a complete breakdown. Riley was already pulling out his phone. "We need to call the police." "No." In what wasn't my best moment, I snatched his phone. "No police. Not yet." "Gabby, your apartment was ransacked by criminals. This is definitely a police matter. Besides, they already know about the teacups." "I need the police to take me seriously, especially since I'm not established with them yet." I chose my words carefully, though guilt flooded me. I hated lying to him, but this didn't seem like the time to explain. I don't want them to see me as a victim who lost half a set of stolen antique teacups worth $500,000. I laughed, but it didn't sound particularly amusing. Sierra stared at me like I'd lost my mind. $500,000? Gabby, what have you gotten yourself into? It's a long story. I carefully stepped around the destruction on my floor, and apparently I'm running out of time to figure it out. We managed to salvage my kitchen table and 3 chairs that had somehow escaped the worst of the destruction. Sierra had disappeared downstairs and returned with a pot of coffee and one of her cats, Mochi, a fluffy gray Persian who looked perpetually judgmental. "Okay." Sierra settled into a dining room chair with Mochi purring in her lap. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." Even though we were on a time crunch, I decided to tell her anyway. Another perspective might be nice. I told her about Glenn, the teacups, Aunt Lynn, the gas station, the restaurant, Eleanor's dramatic revelation, the shooting, Jeremy's confession, everything. Riley filled in the parts I missed. By the end of it, Sierra was staring at us with wide eyes. "Wait," she said, stroking Mochi's fur. "Did you say 1740 Meissen porcelain? You know about that stuff?" Riley, who'd been leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, suddenly straightened. Sierra gave him a look that suggested he'd just asked if she knew what water was. My parents are art collectors. I grew up going to auction houses and estate sales. Meissen porcelain from that period isn't just valuable, it's museum quality. So they really could be worth $500,000? I asked. If they're authentic and in good condition, easily. Maybe more, depending on the specific pattern and provenance. She shifted Mochi to get more comfortable. The question is, what are these people planning to do with these teacups? Sell them? Riley suggested with a shrug. Obviously, but where? Sierra's analytical mind was clearly working. You can't just walk into Sotheby's with stolen 18th century porcelain. Any legitimate auction house would want documentation, provenance, insurance records. So what would they do? I asked. An underground auction, Sierra said matter-of-factly, like she was discussing the weather. There's a whole black market for high-end art and antiques. People who don't ask questions about where things come from. Riley leaned forward. How do you know about underground auctions? Because my parents' collection has been targeted before. You learn about these things when you have to deal with art theft insurance. She scratched behind Mochi's ears, and the cat purred louder. The most logical conclusion would be to sell the complete set to the highest bidder. A partial set would be worth significantly less. Which is why they need all 12 teacups. The pieces began to fall into place in my mind. Exactly. But here's the thing. If they're planning an underground auction, they'll need time to set it up, contact buyers, arrange security. That kind of thing doesn't happen overnight. Riley's face brightened for the first time all day, like someone had just turned on a light switch. So we might have more time than we thought? Maybe, or maybe they already had a buyer lined up. Sierra shrugged. Without knowing more about their operation, it's hard to say. I slumped back in my chair. Great. So how are we supposed to find an underground auction that may or may not be happening at some unknown location at some unknown time? Sierra was quiet a moment, absently petting Mochi while she thought. That's a good question, but I might know someone who can help. Someone who knows about illegal art auctions? Riley blinked slowly, like he was processing whether he really wanted to know the answer to that question. Someone who knows about a lot of things that aren't exactly legal. Sierra offered a slight smile. You remember Lucas, right, Gabby? I went to college with him, and you met him at that fundraiser I did for that endangered beetle a few months back? I groaned. Lucas Hort? Oh yeah, I remember him. Didn't he get kicked out of college for hacking into the administration's computer system? The guy had talked nonstop when I met him, and I'd needed a mental detox afterward. I told myself that if I ever saw the man again, it would be too soon. The very same. Except now he's a cybersecurity consultant, which is apparently a very fancy way of saying reformed hacker who gets paid to break into things legally. I still struggled to put the pieces together. And you think he can help us how exactly? Lucas has connections everywhere. If there's an underground auction happening in this area, he'll know about it. Sierra stood up, carefully depositing Mochi on her vacated chair. Plus, he owes me a favor. What kind of favor? My voice took on the cautious tone I usually reserved for crime scenes that looked a little too clean. The kind where I didn't turn him in when I caught him illegally accessing animal testing lab databases to leak their research. Riley and I exchanged glances. Okay, I said. Call Lucas. Chapter 12. Lucas Hort worked for a cybersecurity firm called SecureNet Solutions. The company was housed in one of those gleaming office buildings that screamed, legitimate business practices only. The kind of place where everyone wore business casual and pretended to drink coffee that wasn't from a gas station. We found Lucas in the lobby, looking every inch the reformed tech professional in his button-down shirt and khakis. His hair was shorter than I remembered from our last encounter, and he'd traded his band t-shirt for what appeared to be actual grown-up clothes. Sierra. He approached us with obvious nervousness. "This is unexpected." "Hi, Lucas." Sierra shifted Mochi to her other arm. As of late, Mochi was her emotional support cat, and she took him everywhere. "We need to talk," Sierra finished. Lucas glanced around the lobby, where several of his coworkers were pretending not to eavesdrop. "Can we maybe take this outside?" "Of course." Sierra's words sounded sweet, but there was steel in her voice that suggested this wasn't really a request. We followed Lucas out to a small courtyard behind the building, complete with those modern metal benches that were probably designed by someone who believed that comfort was a sign of moral weakness. Sierra let Mochi down from her arms, and the cat began exploring the landscaping with the kind of intense focus that suggested he was planning a hostile takeover. "So," Lucas adjusted his tie nervously. "What's this about?" "We need your help." Sierra got right to the point. "And before you say no, remember that you owe me." His expression tightened. "Sierra, I'm trying to build a legitimate career here. I can't just—" "Lucas." Sierra's voice cut through his protests like a knife. "These are my friends. They're in serious trouble, and you're going to help them." I had to admire Sierra's approach. No beating around the bush, no lengthy explanations. Just straightforward intimidation wrapped in a friendly package. Lucas sighed. What kind of trouble? So we told him. The whole story, from Glenn's teacups to the ransacked apartment. And just like everyone else we'd talked to today, Lucas had the exact same reaction when we mentioned 1740 Meissen porcelain. First, his eyes went wide. Then he made a sort of strangled, choking sound. Then he stared at us like we'd just told him we were personally delivering the Mona Lisa. I was starting to see a pattern here. Eyes wide, choking sound, stare of disbelief. At this point, I could probably perform the whole routine myself. Maybe I should start charging admission. "You're telling me," Lucas said slowly, "that you lost 6 pieces of authentic 18th century Meissen porcelain worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now some very dangerous people are threatening to kill you if you don't get them back." I shrugged, as if this conversation were normal, a subject I talked about every day. "That's the gist of it." Lucas ran his hands through his hair, destroying his carefully professional appearance. "Oh, this is bad. This is really, really bad." "We know." Riley frowned. "The question is, can you help us?" I held my breath as I waited for his answer. Lucas was quiet for several moments, watching Mochi bat at a butterfly. Then he said, "I don't know anything for sure, but I may or may not monitor some things going on in the area on the dark web." "And?" I pressed. "And I did hear something about an underground auction that's taking place tonight," he said. "High-end stuff, art, antiques, things that don't have clear provenance." "Where?" Sierra narrowed her eyes as if cautious about his quick response. He paused before saying, "The old Whitmore mansion. The place has been abandoned for years, but someone's been using it for private events." Sierra's expression darkened. "What kind of private events?" He grimaced. "You don't want to know." "Lucas, tell me." She said the words through clenched teeth. He sighed, probably knowing better than to resist. Sierra was very persuasive. Art, antiques, rare books, and exotic animals. Sierra's expression went from concerned to furious in about half a second. Exotic animals? You mean like endangered species? "I mean like whatever rich people with questionable morals want to buy," Lucas said quietly. Mochi seemed to sense his human's emotional state. The feline trotted over and began rubbing against Sierra's legs. She picked the cat up and held him protectively against her chest. "We have to stop this." Sierra's eyes blazed, and her jaw was set in an expression I recognized from her circus protesting days. "Whoa, hold on," I said. Our job is to find the missing teacups, not break up an illegal animal trafficking ring." "Gabby's right," Riley added, though he looked like he agreed with Sierra in principle. "We need to stay focused." Lucas shook his head. "You need to be very, very careful. These aren't the kind of people who just break into apartments and leave threatening notes. If they're running an operation like this, they have serious resources and zero tolerance for interference." I looked at Lucas, then at Riley, then at Sierra, who was now whispering reassurances to Mochi. The message was coming through loud and clear. Riley and I were in way over our heads, dealing with people who wouldn't hesitate to make us disappear permanently. Got it. Message received. Filed under things that could get me killed today. The question was, what were we going to do about it? Chapter 13. We dropped Sierra off at her apartment, and I watched her hurry inside with Mochi. Something about the determined set of her shoulders made me suspicious. "She's going to try to do something about those animals, isn't she?" I said, as Riley pulled away from the curb. "Probably," Riley agreed. "Think we should be worried?" "About Sierra? She once chained herself to a tree for 3 days to stop a developer from cutting it down. I'm pretty sure she can handle herself." Riley found a parking spot on the street and turned off the engine. We sat in comfortable silence a moment, both of us probably trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. "Why am I still making bad decisions?" I finally asked. "I thought I'd put this behind me. This whole thing makes me feel like a failure." Riley's tone softened as he said, "You're not a failure, Gabby. I know that, intellectually, at least. But it's hard not to feel like I'm just stuck in some kind of cycle. 2 steps forward and 2 steps back." I stared out the windshield at the people walking by, each presumably heading somewhere with purpose. Riley stayed quiet before saying, "You want to know what I see when I look at you? A hot mess with a talent for stumbling into trouble?" I raised my eyebrows and tilted my head, sounding more playful than I felt. "I see someone who never gives up." He turned to look directly at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "Someone who cares enough about people to clean up the worst scenes imaginable, who jumps headfirst into helping strangers, who solves puzzles that would make most people run away screaming." Warmth spread in my chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "The medical examiner's office is lucky to have you," he continued. My stomach clenched. Was this a good time to tell him? Before I could start, he continued. "Today alone, you've tracked down criminals, survived a shooting, and figured out a conspiracy that involves $500,000 in stolen antiques. Most people would have called the police and hidden under their beds by now. To be fair, hiding under my bed isn't really an option since my apartment was trashed." Riley ignored my attempt at deflection. "My point is, you're not half empty. You're not even half full. You're completely full of potential that you haven't even discovered yet." As I stared at him, the sincerity in his eyes made my throat tighten. I couldn't tell him. Not now. Not when he seemed so proud of me. Instead, I said, "Thanks, Riley. That means a lot." "Besides," he added with a grin, "look at it this way. If we survive tonight, you'll have one heck of a story to tell at parties." I laughed, despite myself. "Right. Tell us about a time you overcame a challenge." "Well, there was this one time I got threatened by criminals over some teacups." "See? You're already ahead of the competition." My stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, reminding me that we'd been surviving on a picnic lunch and adrenaline for most of the day. It was past 6 o'clock now. "We should probably eat something before we figure out how to infiltrate an underground auction," I said. "Good point. It's hard to save the day on an empty stomach." I cocked an eyebrow. "Ain't that the truth?" As Riley started the car again, I found myself humming "Tomorrow" under my breath. "Is that from Annie?" Riley asked with a raised eyebrow. "What? It seems appropriate, especially since I'm not sure I'll live to see another day. Trying to keep the hope alive." "Fair enough. though I'm partial to Don't Stop Believin' myself. Ooh, good choice. I began singing the song as we drove toward downtown. Journey always works when you need to pump yourself up for potentially life-threatening situations. Riley stole a glance at me. Is that a scientifically proven fact? Absolutely. I read it in a very reputable medical journal. I grinned at him. The one I made up in my head just now. Riley laughed, and for the first time all day, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we actually had a chance of getting out of this mess alive. Now, we just had to figure out how to crash an underground auction, find 6 missing teacups, and avoid getting killed by people who made Antlin look like your everyday friendly neighbor. Piece of cake, right? Chapter 14. Casa Miguel was Riley's and my go-to spot when we needed comfort food and a chance to think. As soon as we walked in, the familiar smell of cumin and fresh tortillas wrapped around us like a warm hug, and the cheerful sound of mariachi music from the speakers made everything feel slightly less dire. Riley and I slid into our usual booth, and I was just starting to relax when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. What is it? Riley leaned closer as he seemed to notice my expression. I clicked on it. Instead of a text message, it was a video. A very short, very clear video of Antlin sitting in what looked like his living room, staring directly into the camera. Without breaking eye contact, he slowly drew his finger across his throat. The video ended. Well, that's not ominous at all. I showed Riley the screen. His skin dropped a shade or two lighter as he watched the video. He really has a flair for the dramatic, doesn't he? I set my phone face down on the table. How did a simple errand for extra cash turn into this? I was supposed to transport some dishes, get paid, maybe buy groceries for the week. Instead, I'm being threatened by people who make home videos about throat slashing. Riley studied the menu even though we both always ordered the same thing. To be fair, this does kind of fit your track record. I gave him the side eye. What's that supposed to mean? You have a talent for turning routine situations into adventures. Remember when you bid on that storage unit and ended up solving a cold case? I shrugged. That was different. That was helping people. He tilted his head. And what do you think you're doing now? I considered his question while our server brought us chips and salsa. As soon as the waiter left, I grabbed a salty chip and said, "Getting myself killed over teacups?" Stopping criminals from selling stolen antiquities and exotic animals to the highest bidder. He gave me a pointed look. When he put it like that, my plan did sound slightly more noble. I scooped up some salsa before drawing in a deep breath and slowly blowing it out. Salsa dripped from my chip onto the table because I was taking entirely too long to eat this yumminess. But I would wait another moment because my mama had always taught me not to talk with food in my mouth. Okay, so assuming we don't want to just walk away from this, which we can't considering Antlin's charming video message, what exactly is going on? Let's talk it all through starting from the beginning. Good idea. Okay, so Glenn gave us these teacups to transport and now his nephew thinks we stole half of them. Someone else must have stolen them. Maybe the guy from Mama's. Then someone shot at us and trashed my apartment. Though I'm still not sure what they hope to prove with those 2 little stunts. Me neither, Riley agreed. Now, who knows where these teacups are? I assume they'll end up at the auction tonight? There's a lot that still doesn't make sense. Riley blew out a long breath. It seems as if 2 sets of people are vying to get their hands on these antiquities, and we've been caught in the middle. I leaned back. How did Glenn even get these cups? The pieces just don't fit for me. Me neither. But what we really need to figure out is how to get them back. Which means, how do we get into this auction? Riley crunched thoughtfully on a chip. With that thought, I took a bite of my own chip, delighting in the salty crunch combined with the spicy salsa. Chips and salsa was the best combination ever, and whoever had invented them should be given the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, who could be angry while eating chips and salsa? They were practically the solution to world peace. Riley swallowed before saying, I don't like this. Any of it. But if we're going to proceed, we need a cover story. We can't just show up and hope for the best. Right. So what kind of people attend underground auctions for stolen art? I scooped up more salsa onto a chip, suddenly famished. Rich people with questionable morals and flexible ethics? Isn't that what Lucas said? Unfortunately, yes. Those are the kind of people who think they can get away with anything. I frowned. I'd dealt with enough people like that, and they were never fun. We'll need to be able to blend in, which means we need to look the part and know enough to be convincing. I pulled out my phone and started Googling to get some ideas on what kind of personas Riley and I might be able to take on. Okay, so who buys this kind of stuff? Art collectors, obviously. Private museums, people who want to own things that nobody else can have. What about dealers? Riley suggested. People who buy things at auctions to resell them later? That could work. We could be dealers looking for specific pieces for clients. I sat up straighter, my mind already spinning with possibilities. Rich, eccentric clients who don't care about provenance, a word I hadn't even heard before today, and now I'm totally sick of. If I ever hear it again after today, it will be too soon. Do you know anything about dealing antiques? I frowned as I thought about my answer. Not really, but I know about crime scenes. Plus, Sierra gave us enough information about mice and porcelain to sound somewhat credible. Riley nodded slowly. I'm sure there's a guest list, a very exclusive guest list. You're right. Even if we get on it, we'll need to look the part, like we belong. I don't think my jeans and your khakis are going to cut it. Agreed. That means we'll need to go on a little shopping trip, something that says, we have money, but we're not flashy about it. And we need a story about why we're specifically interested in the teacups. We can't just show up hoping they'll be auctioned. I thought about our dilemma a moment. What if we say we represent a private collector who's been looking for pieces to complete a set? That we heard through the grapevine that these specific pieces might be available? That could work, but Gabby, what if we actually find them? How do we get them back without ending up in Antlin's next throat-slashing video? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Or in this case, the $500,000 question. I'm working on that part, I said, though honestly, I had no idea. Our food arrived, and we spent the next few minutes eating and thinking. Finally, Riley looked up from his enchiladas. What if we don't try to steal them back during the auction? What do you mean? What if we find out who buys them and then approach them afterward, explain the situation, offer to buy them back? I considered this. That assumes the buyer would be willing to give them up, and that we'd have enough money to make it worth their while, which we don't, not even close. I was excited about making a lousy $100 by doing this stupid job. Or, Riley said slowly, we could tip off the police about the auction. Let them handle the criminals and hopefully get the teacups back as evidence. And hope that Antlin doesn't find out we're the ones who called the cops? Riley dropped his head to the side. There is that. I sighed and took another bite of my quesadilla. You know what? Let's just focus on getting in first. I'm going to see if Lucas can somehow hack into the files for the event and add our names to the guest list. Good idea. Once we're there, we can figure out our next move. Famous last words, Riley muttered. Famous last words indeed. But at this point, what choice did we have? Chapter 15. Riley and I left Casa Miguel with full bellies and heads buzzing with plans. We had 3 hours to find appropriate clothing, get to the Whitmore mansion, and somehow infiltrate an underground auction without getting ourselves killed. There's that thrift shop downtown, I said as we walked toward Riley's car. The one that always has designer stuff that rich people donate when they get tired of it. Perfect. We need to look like we belong at this thing, but not so fancy that we stand out. I was already mentally trying to figure out what we'd need. Something sophisticated but understated. The kind of outfit that said, "I have money, but I don't need to prove it to you." Riley unlocked the car, and I climbed into the passenger seat, still talking about our cover story. We should probably come up with names for our fake clients, in case anyone asks detailed questions about. Don't turn around. The voice came from directly behind my head, low and accented. My blood turned to ice. Riley's hand froze on the ignition, and his knuckles went white as he gripped the keys. Both of you, hands where I can see them. I slowly raised my hands, my mind racing. This was it. This was how I was going to die, in the passenger seat of Riley's sensible sedan after eating too many quesadillas. If this were a musical, this would be the moment where the tragic heroine realizes her fate is sealed, where the orchestra swells, and she accepts her destiny with grace and dignity. Unfortunately, this wasn't a musical, and I was pretty sure I was about to hyperventilate. "You're Gabby St. Clair," the voice continued. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I managed to whisper. "You have something that belongs to my employer." I caught a glimpse of the man in the side mirror. It was the driver we'd seen at Mama's. Granite face. And he had a gun pointed directly at the back of my head. "I don't have anything." My voice only shook a little as I said the words, something I was super proud of. That's kind of the whole problem. "The Meissen porcelain. Where is it?" "We don't know. We're trying to find it." There was a long pause. Then, "My employer is very disappointed that the transaction was not completed as agreed." "What transaction?" Riley bristled as if he was in the courtroom about to argue his case. "The acquisition of the porcelain set. It was to be delivered to my employer tonight. Instead, we find that half the pieces are missing, and the courier is..." He seemed to search for the right word. "Unreliable." Great. So now we had two different groups of dangerous people after us. The ones who'd stolen the teacups from Glenn, and apparently the ones who were supposed to buy them. "We're going to get them back," I said quickly. "Tonight. There's an auction." "I know about the auction." His voice was cold. "You will retrieve the complete set and deliver it to the address I'll send you at a later time." "Send how?" "Trust me, you'll receive it. We expect to see you by 11:30. Tonight." A business card appeared over my shoulder, and I took it with trembling fingers. "If you fail or contact the authorities, you will join the porcelain collection and disappear. Only your disappearance will be permanent. Do you understand?" "Absolutely," I squeaked. "Excellent." The car door opened and closed with barely a sound, and Granite Face was gone as silently as he'd appeared. Riley and I sat in stunned silence for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds. Riley's voice sounded slightly hoarse as he said, "Next time, when someone suggests a way for you to make some extra money, stick to cleaning crime scenes." Agreed. I stared at the business card in my shaking hands. Absolutely, 100% agree. Because apparently, a simple delivery job had just turned into the kind of international antiquities theft conspiracy that usually happened only in movies. Now, we were caught between two groups of criminals who both wanted the same thing, and both seemed perfectly willing to kill us to get it. 3 hours suddenly felt like nowhere near enough time. Chapter 16. The thrift shop miracle had delivered. I smoothed the charcoal gray dress I'd found, something that probably cost more than my rent when it was new, and checked my reflection one more time in my bathroom mirror. With the understated pearl earrings, fake pearl earrings, and black pumps, I looked like someone who might actually belong at an underground auction for stolen art. I stepped into the hallway, ignoring my ransacked apartment. If I survived tonight, I'd clean this place up. No need to put in all the effort now if I was going to die later. Riley waited for me in the living room, and I did a double take when I saw him. Gone were his khakis and polo shirt. They were replaced by a perfectly tailored navy suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. His hair was combed back, and he'd found a watch that looked expensive, but not flashy. Wow. I stared at him, letting out a soft whistle. We clean up nicely. You look... He paused, his eyes taking in the transformation. You look incredible, Gabby. Like you were born to attend exclusive auctions put on by criminal enterprises. That's definitely going on my resume. I snapped my fingers before pointing at him. Then his expression turned serious, and he stepped closer, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. Hey, we're going to get through this, okay? Whatever happens tonight, we're going to figure it out. I wished I believed that. Riley. He leaned down and kissed me, gentle but sure. And for just a moment, the fear and chaos of the day melted away like tension before a crescendo, that breathless moment when everything hangs in perfect balance. When Riley and I broke apart, I felt somehow steadier, like I could face whatever came next. This was why I loved Riley so much, not just because he made me laugh or because he was willing to drive me around on crazy courier missions that could get us killed. It was because he had a way of making me feel like I was braver and stronger than I actually was. Like together, we could handle anything. Even international antiquities, thieves with guns, and throat-slashing nephews with ankle monitors. We should go. I reluctantly glanced at my phone. It's almost time. I grabbed an elegant black briefcase I was bringing with me. I hoped it appeared as if it might have money inside. In reality, the teacups should fit perfectly and be secure. As we walked outside, I tried to mentally prepare for what we were about to attempt. In the parking lot, I noticed Sierra's little blue Honda still parked in its usual spot. Relief flooded through me. She's still here. Maybe she decided not to go after all. Riley didn't sound entirely convinced. Maybe she realized that trying to single-handedly shut down an exotic animal trafficking ring wasn't the smartest idea she'd ever had. This is Sierra we're talking about. Remember the circus incident? He had a point. Sierra wasn't exactly known for backing down from causes she believed in. But her car was here, which meant she wasn't currently infiltrating criminal operations, and that was good enough for me. We climbed into Riley's car, and he started the engine. The GPS showed 20 minutes to the Whitmore mansion. That gave us just enough time to get there fashionably late. Not so early that we'd stand out, but not so late that we'd miss anything important. So, just to review one more time, I said as we pulled out of the parking lot. We're dealers representing private collectors. We're specifically interested in 18th century porcelain, and we heard through the grapevine that some interesting pieces might be available tonight. Got it. And if anyone asks for details about our clients? Eccentric recluses who value their privacy above all else, I murmured, reciting our cover story. Perfect! My nerves thrummed through me, making my hands shake slightly as I checked my appearance one more time in the visor mirror. We were really doing this. We were really about to walk into a mansion full of criminals and try to retrieve $500,000 worth of stolen antiques. And if we failed, we'd have to explain to both Antlin and Granite Face why we couldn't deliver what they wanted. Riley, you know we don't actually have a backup plan, right? I asked as we turned onto the highway. I know. So if this doesn't work? It has to work, he said simply. Because the alternative isn't really an option. He was right. We were all in now, whether we liked it or not. I just hoped our acting skills were better than our track record with simple delivery jobs. Chapter 17. Several minutes later, Riley and I pulled down a lane surrounded by trees, making this old estate private. Privacy was essential for events like this one. At the end sat an old Georgian mansion whose silhouette looked downright creepy in the moonlight. Water from the Elizabeth River glimmered beyond the old buildings, and probably 20 cars were parked outside, most of them luxury brands. We parked, adjusted our clothing, and lifted a quick prayer before setting our plan into motion. "Here goes nothing," Riley murmured as we approached the front entrance. A man in a black suit stood at the door, checking names against a list on a tablet. My heart hammered as we approached. Names? The man looked grumpy, like he didn't want to be here. He barely even glanced up at us. Richard and Gabriel Montgomery, Riley said. We'd practiced this in the car. The man scrolled through his list, found our fake names, and waved us through. Apparently, Lucas had been as good as his word about getting us on the guest list. Relief swept through me. Inside, the mansion was a study in faded grandeur that someone had tried to resurrect for one night. Crystal chandeliers that probably hadn't been cleaned in years cast warm light over groups of well-dressed people speaking in hushed tones. In the back of the property, I heard a generator running. It was probably the only reason this place had power. Servers circulated with champagne and canapes, carefully navigating around areas where the original hardwood floors showed gaps and warping. Classical music played softly in the background, probably from a portable sound system since I doubted this place had working built-in speakers. Someone had clearly put effort into making the main areas presentable. Fresh flowers masked the musty smell, and strategically placed lighting hid the worst of the peeling wallpaper. But you could still see the mansion's abandonment in the details. Boarded windows visible through gaps in hastily hung curtains. Doorways blocked off with velvet ropes that probably led to rooms too damaged to use. If I didn't know better, I'd think we were at a legitimate gala. A very creepy gala held in a house that was one strong wind away from being condemned. I swept the faces for anyone familiar, but I didn't recognize anyone. I feared Riley and I might stand out here. But no one else seemed to know each other either. There wasn't a lot of mingling. Stay close. Riley accepted 2 glasses of champagne from a passing server. And remember, we're here to buy art for our reclusive clients. We stood to ourselves for several minutes, listening to conversations about authenticity and the declining quality of modern craftsmanship. I was surprised by how normal everyone seemed. Just wealthy people talking about expensive things they wanted to own in a similar fashion to someone at a fish market picking the perfect tuna steak. Then I spotted a familiar face across the room. The twitchy guy from the restaurant was here, minus the nervous energy. He'd cleaned up well, wearing an expensive suit and talking animatedly to a woman dripping in diamonds. But it was definitely him. Same mustache, same darting eyes. "Riley," I whispered. 3 o'clock, restaurant guy. Riley casually turned to look. Well, that's interesting. Think he'll recognize us? Let's not find out. We drifted toward the opposite side of the room, where I noticed a discreet sign. Private collection, lower level. That's where they'll have the auction items, I whispered. Should we try it? I didn't have to think about it long before nodding. Let's go for it. We made our way toward a sweeping staircase that led to the mansion's lower level. Most homes in this area didn't have basements, and when they did, it was really just a ground-level floor dubbed as a basement. The water table was entirely too high to go underground. That was the case with this place as well. A sweeping staircase had led to the front door, creating an artificial basement below. That basement was exactly where I needed to go. However, a security guard stood at the entrance, and it was clear this wasn't an area where guests could wander freely. I drew in a deep breath before telling Riley, I need you to create a distraction, something to get that guard away from the stairs. Gabby, I should be the one going down there. No, I cut him off. I got us into this mess. I'm getting us out of it. Plus, you're better at talking your way out of things. Riley looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded. What kind of distraction? I don't know. Complain about wine service, ask complicated questions about provenance, start reciting the Constitution loudly, whatever works. We moved closer to the staircase, positioning ourselves where Riley could approach the guard. My palms sweated as I watched my fiancé draw in a deep breath. Then it was showtime. Excuse me. Riley approached the security guard with the kind of confident stride that screamed, "I'm an important person with legitimate concerns." "I'm Richard Montgomery, and I'm here representing some very particular clients. I have some questions about the authentication process for tonight's items." The guard's confident posture deflated slightly, and he looked like someone who just realized his job description hadn't covered handling demanding rich people with legal questions. "Sir, I'm just security. You'd need to speak with—" "This is quite urgent." Riley pulled out his phone like he was about to make a very important call. "My clients are considering some significant purchases tonight, but they'll need assurance that proper documentation is available. Is there someone here who can walk me through the verification procedures?" The guard glanced around, clearly out of his element. Then he said, "I'll take you to Mickey. John, can you keep watch here?" "1 second," another guard called before continuing talking to a man near the bacon-wrapped scallops. "This just might present me with the brief window I needed." Riley and the guard walked away. Wasting no time, I slipped down the stairway. My legs felt like jelly, and every step seemed too loud, but I finally reached the bottom level. If only this made things easier. But voices sounded in the distance. There were guards down here also. I sucked in a breath and carefully peered around the corner. As I did, 2 guards slipped into a room. I needed to move, and fast. The first room I reached contained the kind of art I'd expected. Paintings, sculptures, jewelry displayed on tables. But as I moved deeper into the basement, the tension between my shoulders pulled tighter. And it wasn't just because there were guards I needed to avoid. The air felt heavier back here, more oppressive. And things got stranger. In one room, I found exotic birds in gilded cages, their bright feathers dulled by the artificial lighting. They watched me with intelligent eyes that made my skin crawl. In another room, there were larger cages containing what looked like baby tigers, pacing restlessly behind the bars. My stomach turned. I was with Sierra on this one. Auctioning animals just felt wrong. The teacups were in the third room, displayed on a white cloth alongside other porcelain pieces. They looked impossibly innocent compared to the horrors I'd just witnessed. A moment of victory washed through me. I did a quick count. All 12 were here. How was that possible? Before I could think too hard, my phone rang. I quickly silenced it, my heart beating faster. That was a rookie mistake, a detail I should have thought about earlier. I quickly slid the switch to vibrate and answered without looking to see who was calling. "Gabby?" I recognized the accent right away. "Eleanor, this is kind of a bad time." "The picture you showed me, I looked at it again," she continued as if she didn't hear me. "The cups you had were fake." I froze. "What?" "There's a stamp on the bottom. It says, 'Made in China.'" I pulled the phone from my ear and found the photo. My mouth dropped open. She was right. The words were there. How had I not noticed that earlier? "I just thought you should know you were transporting fakes." "Thanks." I picked up one of the cups in front of me and turned it over. These did not say, "Made in China," on the bottom. Why would Glenn have given me fakes? "And there's one other thing," Eleanor continued. "I talked to a friend of mine over in Europe who's in the antique business. He told me some Meissen teacups were stolen from a German museum a couple of months ago." So had Glenn somehow managed to pull off an international art heist? I just couldn't see him doing that. Before I could think about it too long, I got a text from Riley. "Someone coming. Hide now." My heart stopped. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, getting closer. I whipped my head from side to side, desperately searching every corner of the room for somewhere to conceal myself. But the room was mostly open space, with tables displaying items I could only assume were valuable and possibly stolen. I spotted a service closet in the corner. I dove inside just as the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Then I started to pray. Chapter 18. The footsteps paused right outside the room where I was hiding. "Check the porcelain," a voice said. "Make sure everything's still secure." I held my breath and pressed myself against the back wall of the closet. My heart was hammering so loud I was sure they could hear it through the thin door. Through the crack, I saw a shadow moving around the room. "Everything looks good," a second voice replied. "I still think we should have more security down here, though. The boss doesn't want too many people knowing about the auction. Bad enough we had to use this place at all." I tried to make myself smaller, which was challenging given that I was already crammed between a mop bucket and what felt like a decade's worth of cobwebs. Something dug into my back, probably a shelf bracket, but I didn't dare adjust my position. What about the animals? They getting restless? The handlers sedated them earlier. Won't be a problem until showtime. My stomach lurched. Sedated animals. This was so much worse than I'd imagined. The shadow moved closer to the porcelain display, and I heard the soft clink of someone carefully examining the pieces. Please don't let them notice that someone had been here. Please don't let them see fingerprints or disturbed dust or anything that would give me away. Boss wants the teacups moved upstairs before the bidding starts. High-priority items go in the main display. All of them? Yes, all of them. My blood ran cold. They were talking about the teacups I needed to grab. They couldn't take them upstairs. Not now. The shadow moved even closer to my hiding spot, and I saw feet through the crack in the door, black dress shoes, expensive looking. I pressed myself further against the wall, pretty sure I was about to become very familiar with the inside of a police station. Or worse, the inside of a coffin. That was when I heard it, a faint vibration in my pocket. My phone, set to silent, still buzzed with a text message. The footsteps stopped. "Did you hear that?" I closed my eyes and prepared for the worst. Before the worst could happen, chaos broke loose upstairs. "Animal abusers!" The voice was unmistakably Sierra's, carrying through the mansion with the kind of righteous fury that could probably be heard across the water in Portsmouth. "You should be ashamed of yourselves." The shadow outside my closet door froze. "Those are endangered species," Sierra continued, her voice getting closer to what sounded like the main entrance. "I'm calling the FBI and the ASPCA and TMZ." Rapid footsteps sounded as whoever had been checking the porcelain ran toward the stairs. "What in tarnation is going on up there?" a voice called out. "Some crazy woman with a protest sign," a man replied. "She's got a megaphone." Of course she had a megaphone. This was Sierra we were talking about. I should have known she'd show up here, and her timing couldn't have been better. Through the mansion's old walls, I heard what sounded like complete chaos. Multiple voices shouting, feet running, and Sierra's voice rising above it all like an avenging angel with a degree in environmental science. "Mochi and I demand justice for these innocent creatures." Wait. She'd brought her cat? To this? This was my chance. I slipped out of the closet and grabbed the teacups and saucers, placing them carefully in my briefcase. I had to be careful. I'd come this far, and I couldn't break them now. The sounds of Sierra's one-woman revolution became louder, and I heard more people running. I made it back to the staircase just as Riley appeared halfway down, a frazzled look in his eyes. "I'm assuming that's Sierra causing World War III, I whispered. "It's Sierra," he confirmed. "She's chained herself near the front door, and she's live-streaming the whole thing on social media." Of course she is. We ran back up the stairs and found absolute pandemonium in the main hall. Sierra had indeed chained herself to a column in the front entrance with her phone propped up for maximum livestream coverage. But that wasn't the only chaos she'd created. Mochi was loose and apparently taking his role as protest assistant very seriously. The fluffy gray Persian was currently on top of a buffet table, knocking champagne glasses onto the floor while security tried to figure out how to deal with both a chained activist and a rogue cat without looking like incompetent fools. "The world needs to know what's happening here," Sierra declared to her phone. As she did, Mochi leaped from the buffet to a nearby sculpture. A priceless-looking vase crashed to the floor, and people gasped. "These people are trafficking endangered animals like they're buying furniture," Sierra continued. "Ma'am, you need to leave immediately," a security guard said, but he kept getting distracted by Mochi, who'd now discovered the appetizer station and was batting shrimp off toothpicks. "I'm not leaving until these animals are free," Sierra shot back. "And neither is Mochi." As if understanding his cue perfectly, Mochi launched himself onto the chandelier chain, swinging like a furry, four-legged Tarzan, while well-dressed auction guests scattered beneath him. "Someone catch that cat!" another guard shouted. But Mochi was clearly having the time of his life, leaping from light fixture to curtain rod with the agility of a trained circus performer. Or Jennifer Grey in Dirty Dancing. This was it. Our chance to get out of here while everyone was focused on Sierra's one woman and one cat revolution. Chapter 19. In the chaos, Riley and I were able to slip toward a side exit, completely unnoticed. Just before we reached the door, I caught Sierra's eye through the crowd. She gave me the tiniest nod, then went back to her performance. "This is what happens when good people do nothing," she proclaimed to her growing online audience. "Evil triumphs when—" Riley and I were outside before I could hear the rest of her speech, but I was pretty sure she was quoting Edmund Burke. "Sierra is either completely insane or completely brilliant," Riley said as we sprinted toward his car. "Why not both?" I clutched the briefcase against my chest, feeling victorious, but I didn't want to celebrate too early. Things could still go south. "Do you think Sierra will be okay?" I asked as we sped away from the mansion. I was still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "She's live streaming, most likely to thousands of people," Riley said. "She's probably safer than we are." He was right. Sierra had just blown the whole operation wide open, and she'd done it in the most Sierra way possible, with righteous indignation, a megaphone, and her cat. "Now, we just have to figure out how to deliver these teacups to two different groups of criminals without getting ourselves killed," Riley murmured. I looked down at the briefcase in my lap. 12 innocent-looking teacups that had somehow become the center of an international criminal conspiracy. "Update," I started. "It turns out the teacups I picked up from Glenn's place were fakes. Eleanor called me about it." "What?" Riley's voice rose. "It's true. He must have given them to us as a distraction so he could get the real teacups to this auction without being seen." "That's pretty slimy." "Tell me about it," I muttered. "I don't know how the man from Mama's fits in, or anything else. Not really." "If we were transporting fakes this whole time, that makes me wonder if any of them were even stolen, or was that all a ruse?" "No idea." I blew out a breath. "Did Antlin know they were fakes?" Good question. Maybe he was fooled also. So much still didn't make sense. Any brilliant ideas as to what we should do next? "I'm working on it." Riley's voice suggested he was coming up empty. We had less than 2 hours until the midnight deadline. No doubt Antlin would realize we'd taken the teacups, so he'd come after us. Or he'd send his thuggish friends. Plus, there was Granite Face. How would we satisfy both of them and live to see another day? Riley and I drove in tense silence for about 10 minutes before Riley pulled into an empty parking lot behind a closed strip mall. He turned off the engine, and we both sat there, staring at the teacups in my briefcase. "Okay," I finally said, "let's think about this logically. We have one set of teacups and two groups of people who want them. And both groups have made it very clear they'll kill us if they don't get what they want." "Right. So, what are our options?" Riley drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. "We could give them to Antlin. At least then we'd fulfill our original contract. But then Granite Face kills us. Or we give them to Granite Face and hope Antlin doesn't find us. That seems optimistic. Or," Riley said slowly, "we try to set up some kind of meeting where both parties can negotiate." I stared at him. "You want to arrange a sit-down between two groups of criminals over a tea set?" Maybe we should serve little cucumber sandwiches and scones. We could even put out some doilies and ask everyone to use their indoor voices. Half his lip went up and the other down in a lopsided smile or frown. Then he sighed before saying, "When you put it like that, it sounds completely insane." It is insane. But I found myself actually considering it. What if we told each of them that the other party has made a competing offer that we're willing to sell to the highest bidder? Glenn doesn't want to buy them. He wants to sell them. Besides, do we really want to start a bidding war between people who've threatened to kill us? I shrugged. I want to buy us some time to figure out a better plan. However, I was beginning to realize this was way above my pay grade. Chapter 20. Before Riley could respond, my phone rang. It was an unknown number again, but this time I recognized the area code from the business card Granite Face had given me. "It's him," I whispered to Riley. "You better answer." I cleared my throat before hitting the button and saying, "Hello? You've retrieved the porcelain." It wasn't a question. My breath caught. "How did you—" "We've been watching the mansion. Very impressive work, by the way. Your friend with the cat is quite spirited." "Great. They'd been watching the whole time. I should have known." "Pier 47, Warehouse 3, the man said. 1 hour. "Wait, but—" The line went dead. "What did he say?" Riley asked. "Pier 47, Warehouse 3, 1 hour. Riley's face went pale. "Gabby, that's down by the industrial district. There's nothing down there but empty buildings and—" My phone buzzed with another text. I looked at it, and my stomach sank. "What?" Riley asked. "It's from Antlin." I showed him the screen. "He also wants to set up a meeting. Or an ambush." We sat in silence a moment, I for one imagining all the many ways this could go horribly wrong. "I need to make a call," I announced. "As you do that, I'm going to start driving again." Riley put his car into drive. "I don't want to stay here too long." I pulled out my phone and dialed Lucas's number. He answered on the second ring. "Please tell me you're calling with good news." "We have the teacups, all 12 pieces. But Lucas, Sierra needs your help." "Already on it," Lucas said. "She told me her plan and the police are on their way." "Perfect. Thank you." Next, I called Detective Adams. "Detective, it's Gabby. We have the stolen porcelain and we know where it came from, but we might need backup." "Where are you now?" Adams's voice was sharp with concern. "We're heading back toward downtown, but I think—" I glanced in the side mirror, and my blood went cold. "Riley, we've got company." A black sedan had pulled out behind us, maintaining a careful distance, but definitely following our route. "Adams, we're being followed. Black sedan. Can't make out the plates from here." "Stay on the line. I'm dispatching units to your location." That was when I glanced over my shoulder and spotted the second car, a dark SUV that had fallen in behind the sedan. "Riley," I said quietly, "I think we've got both groups after us." His knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "Antlin and Granite Face?" "That would be my guess." I watched as both vehicles began closing the distance between us. "And I don't think they're planning to negotiate." Riley took a sharp right, tires squealing. "Hold on, Gabby. This is about to get interesting." Chapter 21. Riley veered off the road and headed toward the storage grounds for our local port. "There's less of a chance of casualties here," he murmured. Made sense. But once we pulled in, I realized the area was like a maze of shadows and dead ends. Riley navigated the grounds as if his life depended on it, which, considering our current situation, it probably did. "Left here," I said, still watching our pursuers in the mirrors. "Maybe we can lose them near those old cargo boxes." Riley yanked the wheel and sent us careening around a corner and into a maze of shipping containers. But as we emerged on the other side, my heart sank. The road ahead was blocked by a third vehicle, another black sedan parked sideways across our path. "It's a trap." Riley hit the brakes. Behind us, the other two cars had caught up, effectively boxing us in. Car doors slammed as men emerged from all three vehicles. In the dim overhead light, I saw the unmistakable silhouettes of weapons. "What do we do?" Riley's voice sounded tight with controlled panic. I looked at the bundle in my lap, then at the armed men approaching from all sides. That was when the idea hit me. Take this and get out of the car. I carefully unwrapped one of the teacups and handed it to him. Then I grabbed one myself. His eyes widened as he seemed to realize what I was doing. "Gabby, are you insane?" "Trust me." I opened my door and stepped out, holding the delicate porcelain cup in front of my chest where everyone could see it. The approaching men stopped dead in their tracks. "That's far enough," I called, my voice carrying across the empty lot. "Unless you want to watch $500,000 worth of 18th century Meissen porcelain become very expensive gravel." Antlin emerged from one of the cars, his face twisted with rage and desperation. From the other direction, Granite Face approached with his men. All of them stared at the teacup in my raised hand with obvious horror. "You wouldn't dare," Antlin growled. "Try me." I let the cup wobble in my grip. I've had a really, really bad day, and I'm just about done playing games with people who threaten to kill me over dishes. The two groups of men had formed a rough circle around Riley and me, but none of them dared come closer. The teacup might as well have been a loaded weapon for how carefully they watched it. "Now," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, "I think it's time we all had a little chat." The standoff looked like something out of a crime movie. Guns pointed in every direction, with Riley and me caught in the middle without so much as a water pistol to defend ourselves. The only thing keeping us alive were the delicate teacups we held in front of our chests, like the world's most fragile shield. "You know what I don't understand, Glenn?" I called, spotting him among Antlin's crew. "How exactly did someone like you get his hands on museum-quality porcelain in the first place? You don't exactly strike me as the international art thief type." Glenn stepped forward, and I noticed something immediately. He was walking. No wheelchair, no limp, nothing. "People underestimate me." His voice carried a deeply disturbing pride. "Funny, you're not even disabled, are you?" I asked. "The whole wheelchair thing was just an act." Glenn shrugged. "Throws people off. Makes them misjudge you, feel sorry for you. Amazing what people will do when they think you're helpless." The pieces started to fall into place in my mind, and I didn't like the picture they formed. "So you purposefully gave me fake teacups," I said, each word coming out slowly. "You knew these people were watching you, and you wanted them to follow me instead of you. But then why claim I lost half of them?" Glenn's smile was cold. "Because while everyone was chasing you around Norfolk, I was quietly moving the real teacups to a secure location for tonight's auction. And you had your people shoot at me at Eleanor's antique shop." Anger built inside me. "And ransack my apartment. Why? Just to scare me?" "To keep you from asking too many questions. The last thing I needed was some amateur detective figuring out my plan before it was complete. Of all the couriers I had to hire, it had to be one with a Jessica Fletcher complex." Granite Face stepped forward, his face unironically remaining stony. "Enough talk. Those teacups belong to me. We worked months to obtain them." "You mean to steal them?" He let out a low growl before gesturing sharply at his men. "Give me the teacups. Now. Over my dead body." Antlin swung his weapon toward Granite Face and his men. "That can be arranged," Granite Face deadpanned. I pulled the teacup closer to my chest, acutely aware that everyone's trigger fingers were getting itchier by the second. "You know what?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "This is exactly the kind of international incident I was hoping to avoid." "I bet," Antlin grumbled. "Maybe we could call it Teacup Gate." "Maybe," Granite Face muttered, "or Teacups Gone Wild." Why wouldn't my mouth stop right now? Granite Face only stared at me. Or 50 Shades of Earl Grey. I could go on. Glenn glowered as he stepped toward me. I think we got the point. Now, hand over the teacups. Or else. Chapter 22. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Or a broken teacup. I hoped it didn't come to that. I was pretty sure that any second now, someone was going to start shooting, and this whole standoff would turn into the kind of bloodbath that would make national news. I was calculating my chances of diving behind Riley's car with the teacup intact, when suddenly the entire warehouse district lit up like a football stadium. Floodlights blazed from every direction, and amplified voices echoed off the warehouse walls. Norfolk Police, drop your weapons! Interpol, nobody move! Police cars and unmarked federal vehicles seemed to materialize from the shadows like the ensemble cast appearing for the final number of a very violent musical. Glenn's face went from smug satisfaction to pure panic in about half a second. This wasn't part of the plan. What plan? Antlin roared, but he was already dropping his weapon as red laser sights danced across his chest. Granite Face was the last to surrender his gun, his hard expression never changing even as federal agents moved in to cuff him. Gabby St. Clair? Someone called out, and I saw an agent approaching with what looked like an entire SWAT team behind him. That's me. I carefully lowered the teacup. Agent Morrison, Interpol. He carefully took the cup from my hands and gave it to another agent. I'm so incredibly happy to see you right now. We've been tracking this crime ring for months, Morrison explained as his agents processed the various criminals. Never thought a courier would be the one to blow it open. I'm really more of a crime scene cleaner, to be precise. I wobbled my head back and forth in exaggerated explanation. Morrison gave me a look, but I didn't bother to explain. How in the world did Glenn get his hands on these? Riley asked, his teacup also taken from him. Members of the Crimson Serpent had planned the heist for a while, and they were successful. They managed to steal the teacups from a museum in Germany. They were transporting them to the U.S. so the highest bidder could purchase them. But there was an unfortunate accident while at sea. Several of the containers on the ship they were being transported on fell overboard, including the one these cups were in. A few weeks later, a box containing the dishware washed up on Hatteras Island, and that's apparently when Glenn Larson found them. However, we didn't know that until recently. So, these guys must have somehow found out that Glenn had them, I said, thinking out loud, and they were keeping an eye on him and saw that I picked up the teacups. Why didn't they just go after Glenn if they knew he had them? This is where Glenn wasn't so brilliant, Morrison said. He posted the ad online for the courier. He was already paranoid about the teacups, especially when he found out how valuable they were. When he posted the ad, he gained attention from the Crimson Serpents. They kept an eye on him after that and realized he might have the teacups. Then they saw him hand the cups off to you. I wondered how Jeremy fit in with this. He must have made someone with a connection to the crime ring mad at some point, probably because of his gambling. They'd tried to get him to do the pickup. Glenn is much more cunning than you might have thought. He's been using the wheelchair ruse down in Hatteras for a long time as he preyed on people's kindness. With the attention taken off him, he personally drove the real teacups up to the auction house. He and his nephew were in on this the whole time. They were just waiting for their big paycheck, and then they were going to leave the country, until you stopped them. As I watched Glenn, Antlin, Granite Face, and all their lackeys being loaded into separate police vehicles, a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion washed over me. Riley put his arm around my shoulders. So, how does it feel to help solve an international art theft case? I looked down at the teacups, then at the chaos of law enforcement vehicles, then back at Riley. Like I just survived the world's most violent episode of Antiques Roadshow. When Morrison stepped away, Detective Adams appeared at my elbow, looking equal parts relieved and exasperated. Are you two okay? Define okay? That seemed to be my standard response to that question. Well, you're both breathing and not shot full of holes, so I'm calling it a win. Adams gave me an exasperated look. I still haven't figured out how the guy from Mama's Seafood is involved with this. The Crimson Serpent coerced him into watching Glenn's place, Adams said. So this guy put a tracker on your car at the gas station. He did his job, hoping they would get off his back. He owed them money and was just following directions. He spilled everything to us. I glanced around at the chaos around me. So what happens now? The porcelain goes back to its rightful owner, a museum in Germany. The criminals go to prison. And you. He smiled. You go home with our gratitude and a clean conscience. And the auction? I asked. What about the animals? We have them and are making sure they're well taken care of. Your friend Sierra is personally making sure they're not mistreated. As the agents finished processing the scene, I pulled out my phone to check for any messages. There was one notification from the job app. Payment received $100. I stared at the screen, then started laughing. I couldn't stop myself. Here I was, surrounded by federal agents after helping break up an international art theft ring and exotic animal trafficking operation, and I'd just earned $100 for my trouble. What's so funny? Riley asked. I showed him my phone. I just got paid for the delivery. Riley looked at the screen, then at the pandemonium around us, then back at the screen. Then he started laughing too. At least you can say you completed the job, Riley said. I looked around at the aftermath. Criminals in handcuffs, international agents cataloging evidence, the pristine teacups. You know what? I pocketed my phone. I think I'm going to stick to doing what I've been trained to do from now on. This was the moment. I could tell him the truth. But I pressed my lips together as something stopped me. I just needed more time. Riley raised his eyebrows. No more deliveries? Not even after all this adventure? I considered his words. He thought I was talking about working for the medical examiner. I was actually talking about crime scene cleaning. The job was messy, sometimes gross, and occasionally heartbreaking, but it was also helping people, solving problems, and making a difference. And most importantly, it very rarely involved international criminal conspiracies. Really, I said, though I reserve the right to change my mind if anyone offers me another $100 delivery job. Riley grinned. Deal. But next time, maybe we should read the fine print a little more carefully. Next time, I'm definitely reading the fine print.